This is our medical special, our longevity show. We aim to keep you alive longer. We've got Dr. Paul Saladino. He's our first doctor. He's going to be talking about the rising trend of the carnivore diet and its efficacy. Does it work?
We've been told that meat is bad for us, but when I look at the science, I think meat is good for humans nutritionally. You and I can talk about the ethics.
We're also going to talk to Dr. Rhonda Patrick.
And so I started looking into this research and there's something going on in the brain.
Dr. Mark Hyman, who looks like Jon Stewart, but talks like a medical expert.
We're in a bit of a crisis, and unless we revolutionize the way we grow food, the food we produce, the food we market, the food we eat, we're in trouble.
And if you're joining us on Rumble, you will see Dr. Peter Attia.
What is it about our finitude that obsesses us? Why are we trying to extend life?
Now, you know, Paul, that I'm a very committed vegan. By God, I live and I die for sweet lady veganism. But you're saying that the carnivore diet might have some method to its madness. And what about veganism? Is it some sort of fad? Should we put aside our compassion for the cow and down a bit of their leg?
Not at all. I think that anyone who makes an intentional choice with regard to their diet, anyone who's not just walking as a zombie and eating whatever foods fall in front of them, or they can pick up in an airport or at a fast food joint, deserves to be appreciated. And though you and I make different intentional decisions with regard to our diets, the first step for people finding health, and I think being a good citizens in the community of the earth, is making intentional choices and understanding how we're choosing to eat. With regard to meat versus plants, I have found and I have concerns that when humans don't eat meat and organs, so we're talking about like muscle meat, steaks, hamburgers, or organs like heart and liver, which come with the whole package of the animal, there are a lot of nutrient deficiencies that can develop unless we're very, very intentional about supplementation. And this is where things get really interesting and you go really far down the rabbit hole. But I've just seen so many people improve their health when they include more meat in their diet, and organs, especially like liver. And I think that for the last decades, last 2 to 3, maybe 5 decades, we've been told that meat is bad for us. But when I look at the science, I think meat is good for humans nutritionally. You and I can talk about the ethics and how we navigate that in the world if you want. But I think nutritionally, meat is so valuable for kids, for adults, for elderly. There's so many things to argue for including these animal foods in our diet from a nutritional standpoint.
From a nutritional standpoint, yeah, thank you, Paul, for that distinction. Is it primarily because of protein or particular types of protein? Because I'll say this, I'm actually looking to put on functional muscle mass as a result of a forthcoming contest against RFK. I've got to do a pull-up competition. I'm willing to ingest almost anything. Are you saying it's impossible to get strong enough to win a pull-up competition without a little bit of meat in your diet? And what is it in particular that where are the benefits derived from, mate?
There's the protein in animal foods is more bioavailable than the protein in plant foods. But there are examples of people who eat a vegan diet who have lots of muscles. And some of those people are probably supplementing with some steroids or some exogenous hormones. But I know people in the vegan community that I've had respectful conversations with who are probably just taking a lot of protein powder. But if you just want to eat foods that you could get from the earth, that you could hunt and gather, and not a synthetic hemp protein or a synthetic pea protein made in the lab, you're going to be able to gain muscle and all of the other benefits that come with the meat. We can talk about the other nutrients much more easily by including animal foods in your diet than you would by eating things like peas and lentils and things like this. So if you think about this, this gets a little technical, but there's this one amino acid, leucine, in meat that's associated with muscle growth. And you can get enough leucine to trigger optimal muscle growth in 8 ounces of meat, like a burger patty, maybe even 6 ounces of meat. But to get that amount of leucine, to get Russell Brand jacked to beat RFK in this pull-up contest, you're going to have to eat pounds of rice and lentils. I mean, pounds a day. That's going to cause problems for your septic system in your house, and maybe nobody will want to be around you because of the flatulence. So God. I'm just telling you, like, it's a better, and then we can talk about the other things too. That's just the protein, but there are many other nutrients that are valuable in animal foods and meat that you can't get in plant foods at all.
True Nature's Child says, I've got no gallbladder, so I have to watch the fat or it gets runny. And I feel like, you know, like I do take a lot of protein powders. I drink a nice protein shake. It's delicious. most days. But you're saying that it's not just protein we need to like in your ideal world, Dr. Paul Saladino. You've got salad in your name, but not in your game. The ball bag is out the window, baking in the sun. You're noshing down on elk meat. Is that what it's going to take? Tell us a little bit about your diet, oh wise and handsome man.
Yeah, elk meat and elk liver and grass-fed cattle. We can talk about regenerative agriculture, but beyond the protein, when people think about meat and steaks, they just think about protein. But Russell, it's so interesting when you go down the rabbit hole and you think about the other nutrients that are in meat that are difficult to find in plant foods or impossible to find in plant foods. There's been a lot of research recently about this compound called taurine. And of course, the name is there, it's bull. And taurine has been found in worm models, in mouse models, and in primate models to extend longevity in those models. So we haven't done controlled experiments in humans, but taurine looks to be beneficial for humans in other sorts of experiments in terms of cognitive benefits and as an antioxidant. And the only place you get taurine, so clearly shows benefit across multiple species in longevity and overall quality of life. The only place you get this is animal meat. And I don't know many vegans that are supplementing with taurine. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. What about creatine? What about carnitine? What about carnosine? What about anserine? What about vitamin K2? What about riboflavin? It's just that we've evolved eating meat. And there are so many of these key nutrients that allow us to thrive as humans that are predominantly or exclusively found in meat and organs that don't occur in hemp protein or pea protein or Brussels sprouts.
What about Tina Turner? What about Flavor Flav? You can't just hit me with a list of magical strings of nutrients and expect me to sit there and take it like a baking ball bag. Dr. Paul Saladino, what are the ethnographic and anthropological undergirdings of this? Because as surely as we are hunters, we are gatherers, and I suppose really the only reason I'm not eating animals is not for nutritional reasons. In my case, I've seen Game Changers, I've seen them documentaries. For me, it's just I think, animals, they're all right. I don't want, like as Morrissey once said, I don't think some things' life should end just so I can have a snack. That's the only reason. And I agree with you as well, by the way. I don't think everything should get so politicized that you can't let people be different from you. That's crazy. It sort of don't make no difference. My wife ain't vegan. Do you know what I mean? I'm just, it's not a political thing for me. It's just a personal choice. Like I believe all spiritual choices should fundamentally be personal. And if people are inspired by your sacrifices or endeavors, although I don't know how they would be when they hear how I live my life, coffee sloshing about in my groin while I displace my neighbour's shrubbery, then that's that. But do you think that human beings, is there not a way, mate, that it could be healthier to live on plants, or would that involve the degree of supplementation that you've described? And if it does, what of it? Why not supplement yourself up to the hilt?
So I don't believe there's any evidence in the medical literature that meat is bad for humans. I mean, you sort of asked, is it healthier to be on plants? And I would say, no, it's not. It's healthier to include meat in your diet, especially for children, but even for adults. And then for elderly who become frail, who need the muscle mass to avoid sarcopenia, which is when we get kind of skinny fat, lose our peripheral muscle mass and get kind of like fat on the inside, So we know that what kills elderly people, what causes us to die, is frailty. And the way that you avoid frailty is by having enough quality food in your diet, especially micronutrient-rich meat and organs. And then for children's development, for proper development of the brain and all of the organs and all of these tendons and muscles as kids are developing and growing so they're strong and resilient, the animal foods provide so many unique nutrients that are so hard to get elsewhere. You asked about the anthropology, and I think this is an incredibly important point. So I went to Tanzania last year and got to hang out with this tribe of hunter-gatherers called the Hadza. They're some of the last hunter-gatherers left on the planet. There's only a few thousand true hunter-gatherers left on the planet. And I'll tell you what, we hunted and then we ate the animal. We ate the organs first. We ate the animal from nose to tail. I shared the brain of this animal with the hunter that killed the animal the next day. I ate the brain with him. I'm sure they ate the testicles, but I didn't get a chance to see them because they were so prized. And then we ate honey. They found a beehive and they ate the honey. We found some berries. These hunter-gatherers, they don't care about vegetables at all. They don't want to eat vegetables. They just want to eat meat. They want to eat fruit. They want to eat honey. And they want to eat this baobab fruit. And occasionally they'll eat a tuber, but that's the last thing they care about. If you look at hunter-gatherers, I think that from what we can tell with our ethnographic and anthropologic time machines, humans, we don't give a shit about vegetables if we can get other stuff that tastes better.
Good title. Paul, when you was living with them Indigenous people, how did you get on? Was the vibe good? Did they include you? Did you get on their nerves? Did you start cozying up to them too tight in the living quarters? Was it a bit like Dances with Wolves? Also, like, was there a good ceremonial atmosphere? People living a lifestyle where they were connected to meaning and purpose because survival acquired a kind of mythic quality because it took so much endeavour and focus after a day's hunting. Did it feel beautiful to sit around a campfire? Was there a sense of community, connection? Were there other aspects beyond diet, you diet-obsessed lunatic, that were inspiring?
Yeah, it was really cool to be with them. I mean, I think of them as like the best time machine we've got. It's not a perfect DeLorean. This isn't perfectly Back to the Future, but it's about 50,000 years ago, I imagine, that you go back in time when you see these people. Now, they're influenced by the Western world for sure, but it was really moving to sit around the fire with them. They were very welcoming. They were happy, Russell. They were fundamentally happy and peaceful people. They welcomed us. I think they were more welcoming because we wanted to go on hunts. We said, let's take us on the longest hike, and very few people go visit them. And even fewer of the people that go visit them will go on an 8 or 9 hour hike / run / hunt with them. So we got to see as much as we possibly could embedded with them. And it was just fundamental happiness was what they were sharing with us. Just, they didn't have cell phones. They don't use money. They were just happy having what they had. They had community, and they celebrated the food when they could get it, and they shared it. And especially when we had very successful hunts, there was music and dancing, and they were happy to share that with us. So not a perfect time machine, but it was pretty idyllic. It was really pretty remarkable, the experience with them.
Also, the DeLorean was not a very good time machine. As I recall, there were problems with the flux capacitor, and it broke down in that barn, and Marty McFly had to stay there. And we all know what he did when he met his mum, Paul. And I'm sure you're not endorsing that, Paul, because that's called incest. And that, no, it don't matter how much elk meat you consume, if you're eating it from your mother's lap, that is a problem in the sweet name of Jesus. Mate, what did they hunt, and what do they hunt with?
They make all of their own hunting implements. So they have bows and arrows they make from wood. Their arrows are made from wood. They have a neighboring tribe called the Datoga that will make them steel or metal arrowheads. And they will sometimes take a local plant called an elephant foot plant and put poison on the tip of an arrow. And so they hunt with bows made from wood, sinew, and then arrows they've made by themselves. And they are predominantly hunting local animals around Lake Eyasi in Tanzania. And their hunting grounds have been constricted because of encroachment from other pastoralist tribes. So they don't have as much access to game as they once did, but their prized thing is an eland, which is a large sort of impala type ruminant animal. When I was with them, we hunted baboons, and along the way they would hunt small monkeys and birds.
Did you ever go in the bow and arrow, and wouldn't you feel a bit guilty shooting a baboon down because it's so, sort of the simians beings are so human? Like, I imagine them tumbling out of a tree, sort of going, ah, and almost maybe going, bloody hell, I got a date tonight. Don't you feel a bit? I mean, at least if you shoot an ungulate, it's got that slit up its hoof. I think, oh well, you're asking for it. But a monkey that looks like it, I put aside the one that betrayed Indiana Jones in the marketplace. Fuck that little guy. But normally, monkeys are our friends. Didn't you feel a bit bad about it? And did you have a go?
It's so when we were actually at the key part of the hunt for the baboons, this tribe of Hadza, this maybe 8 or 9 Hadza males, hunters, they just scattered everywhere. They were running, and I was just sort of watching and like trying not to get in their way, but they were herding the monkeys in certain ways. They had dogs. And so they were the ones that were actually trying to get the monkeys out of the tree, or the baboons, excuse me. So I wasn't directly involved in the baboon hunt. I was like right there with them, but it was so frenetic. And I'm a Westerner, right? I've never hunted a baboon in my life. I've never been in their tribe. I have no business doing this with them. The fact that it's like a human and has a thumb and opposable fingers, it is kind of stirring and disturbing, but you also realize that this is life for them. And this kind of goes back to your point earlier. And I'll add this as humbly and as respectfully as possible. When I think about food choices that we make as humans, I'm reminded of a book that I read when I was younger. It's called The Tracker by Tom Brown. And he tells a story in the book of being apprenticed to this Apache Indian elder who was teaching him sort of these Native American ways. And he tells a story of killing his first animal when he was 9 or 10 years old. And it's a lame deer that he's killed by himself with a knife. He brings it back to camp and he's weeping. And this Apache Indian, this Apache and Native American says, "Why are you crying?" And he says, "Because I killed this animal." And I'm paraphrasing from the book, but this has stuck with me. So the response from this elder was, in order for something to live, something else must die. This is the way of life. When you understand that the life in a blade of grass is the same, and it's all kind of this life force, you'll understand this. And the goal is to be respectful of the things that you're using to fuel your life. So even when people want to eat plants and they believe that the plants are resulting in less death, I think that it's interesting and important to really look into that and understand all of the ecosystems that are disrupted by the plants that we eat, all of the by-kills, all the moles, the voles, the beavers, the snakes, the rabbits. There are literally tens of thousands of lives that are disrupted, that are displaced, that are killed when we're plowing a field to grow plants. And so I think that if we want to live on this earth as humans, and I feel like you especially illustrate this, we have the ability to do a lot of good in the world as humans. We have to accept that in order for something to live, something else must die. And when I think about the choices we make in terms of food quality, I believe, and this is just my belief, that by eating meat and organs, we're giving our bodies such unique nutrients that allows us to do the best work in the world, allows us our brains to function well, allows us to be strong and protect our families. And so I believe that we have this purpose on earth to do good in the world, and that none of us should be, I think, ignorant to the way that we affect the world. We're all responsible for ending life. And it's just how we choose to use that gift that we're given as we get the chance to live and do things in the world.
Why is there an assumption that we should want to live, forever, endlessly? And what does it tell us sometimes about, what does it indicate around our fears around death, Peter?
So I think, Russell, you've hit on two very interesting points. And given that we could literally spend an hour just talking about these two things, because on the one hand, you're asking the question, what is it about our finitude that obsesses us? Why are we trying to extend life? And then in the other part of your question, you're basically asking, at least the way I would hear it, why the hell would you want to live longer if the quality of your life, and you're referring, I think, to perhaps the most important aspect of that, which is emotional health, is unwell. So we could talk about both of those, and I'll just briefly offer my take. So first, this is a book that took me 7 years to write in 3 versions. So the first version of that book had no emphasis whatsoever on your first question, right? It was really a Silicon Valley-esque, how to hack your way into a longer life, inch by inch, but with no attention paid to the quality of that life. And I think through my own sort of struggles, the final version of this book came to reflect a very different viewpoint, which is if your relationships to other people, to yourself, are suboptimal, if you're living in pain, living longer would actually be the greatest form of torture. I think to your second question, why are we obsessed with it? I think truthfully, I think mortality is a very difficult concept for us to accept. So we can intellectually sort of say, well, none of us actually matter that much. Our time on this earth is incredibly small. It's a sliver of a sliver of a sliver, a degree of time relative to even just Homo sapiens, let alone life on this planet. But yet emotionally, that fact is so difficult that you and I won't be here in 50 years. I mean, we're simply not going to exist anymore. And I think we tend to want to claw at that as well. So I guess those would be my high level inputs on those two important questions.
What I feel sometimes, Peter, is that it's a war to remain healthy in a society that requires you to be sick. I feel sometimes from some of the great guests we spoke to on our show that we're kind of systemically, at least, regarded as blobs to pump bad food into and sometimes questionable pharmacological remedies into. And so sometimes to remain healthy can be a campaign that has to be almost militaristic. How did health become politicized? How did we arrive at the point where wanting to be fit and healthy was regarded as most recently it's been called a right-wing issue? How has health become regarded in this way? And how is it that our life has become a kind of commodity in itself where we're latched onto vampirically by parasitical big food and big pharma interests?
So again, I think you ask these interesting questions, Russell, and there are several layers to it. So in the order, I think that you're asking it, I think there's a very important transition that has occurred in our species. And even though our entire lives, meaning those of us that are, talking here now and listening, all took place in one era, in the arc of humanity, most of the time we died very fast deaths, right? So if you think about our ancestors, they died from infections and they died from traumatic injuries, and that was it. And, obviously infant mortality was enormous. So mothers were dying all the time, giving birth to kids, many of whom would just die right away. And if you somehow managed to survive childbirth and childhood, you were going to be, mauled by an animal or die of an infection. And that was the way it was for 99.9% of our existence as a species. We, as a species, had this enormous victory in the late 19th and earliest 20th century, which was we basically figured out the remedy for how to stop fast death. And that basically became sanitation, antibiotics, and all of the things that came with germ theory and around that. Also, we developed, things in medicine around critical care, trauma, acute care, things like that. Okay, so the good side of that was we stopped dying from those conditions. The bad news was that toolkit for how to prevent people from dying quickly really had no efficacy against preventing people from dying slowly, which is how we all die today. So most people today are going to die from cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, diabetes, things of that nature. And the approach of wait till you're sick to treat those things doesn't work very well. So that's why we have become these entities that, we're kind of using the wrong playbook. And you've alluded to a number of other things as well, right? Which is our food sucks, our environment sucks, our stress levels suck. I mean, all of these things are kind of working against us. But I think of those as basically the flip side of a technology that also gave us a great advantage. And we're just kind of out of balance with it, I think would be the simplest way to describe that.
Do you have anything to say on the politicization of health and wellness? It seemed that during the pandemic era, it like get outside, get some vitamin D, natural immunity, all became sort of contested ideas. And there's no doubt that there can be machismo attached to staying fit and healthy, participating in martial arts and indeed pull-up challenges against RFK, which I'm personally engaged in right now. I'm having a competition with Robert F. Kennedy to see who can do the most pull-ups. Spoiler alert, it's him. He can do 28. I can't do nearly that many unless I start taking... In fact, I could do with some tips on that subject, Peter. If there are any effective and immediate remedies to make your upper body strength treble, I'll take them. And I don't care who invented them. Moderna, Pfizer, you name it, I'll take it. Even if, and I mean this sincerely, it's a suppository. I'd probably prefer that.
All right, we can talk about that about the pull-up tips later. 28's pretty impressive for Robert, so that's very, very few people can do that. Don't feel bad if you can't, Russell. Now, I'm somewhat surprised by the phenomenon you've described, and I saw an article not yesterday, maybe last week, that said something to the effect of, and this was a serious article, like it was in Time magazine or something, and it talked about how the origins of fitness are racist. And it went on this long rant about how it's really because of the KKK that we have the fitness industry or something like that. And I don't know, truthfully, I'm kind of apoplectic when I see stuff like that. I do think you're right, by the way. I think that during COVID, somehow that became, the entire entity of COVID became political. And the people who said, I would probably rather have my own immune system bolstered by being outdoors, exercising, being in the sauna, being fit, eating well, that became a right-wing view, which it shouldn't be. That should be, I think, the view of everybody. And I think what we're seeing now is simply the snowballing extension of that.
Yet, Peter, life expectancy in the United States is as the shortest it's been for a couple of decades. Is that because our modern diet is killing us, because of environmental factors? What is it that is decreasing life expectancy? You've already given us a sort of a bit of an understanding that the causes of fatality were more environmental, traumatic, disease-oriented historically. Why is there this incremental and sudden decline in life expectancy?
So there's two separate things. So if you go back to, I don't know, 1880-ish, and you look at the change in life expectancy for the next 100 years, it doubled. And it doubled only because the top 8 causes of death, which were all infectious, came out. So you doubled human lifespan from roughly 40 to 80 by removing the 8 most prevalent sources of infectious diseases and communicable diseases. But to your point, no real bearing on chronic diseases. Now, to your question, why has U.S. life expectancy been in decline? The answer is actually in the numbers, which is it is the increase in the deaths of despair. So it is not an increase in cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, or dementia. It is the increase in suicide, overdoses, and alcohol-related deaths. So those 3, which I lump together as deaths of despair, are growing at such a clip that it is outpacing any incremental improvements we have in the others. And as you probably know, Russell, in the past year, we've seen now over 100,000 people die in the U.S. just on account of opioid poisoning.
That's astonishing and terrifying. The gains that have been made as we advance beyond the era of dying like dumb apes as a result of infections is warping and metastasizing into the era where we're being killed by an ailing civilization that induces, and perhaps you could even argue requires, despair. Now, on that spectrum of addiction, I would definitely include eating disorders. I've had an eating disorder when I was a young person, specifically bulimia. And I've seen you talk about obesity and weight loss. And while we're still on YouTube, I'll pose this question. What is the real reason, Peter, that some people can never lose weight, no matter what they do? But before you answer, we're going to leave YouTube now.